Well, if you're a gun voter in Johnson or Sheridan County, you have a choice to make in the upcoming August 20 Republican Party primary. Representative Barry Crago versus Representative Mark Jennings. Who's going to fight for your gun rights in the Wyoming Senate? Stay tuned, guys. We're breaking this race down for you right now. Hey guys, Aaron Dorr here with Wyoming Gun Owners. The August primary is coming up very quick, and in Johnson and Sheridan County, Senate District number 22, we're getting a lot of questions from gun owners about this open seat primary between Mark Jennings and Barry Crago. This was Dave Kinski's seat. He is retiring from public office. He was excellent on gun rights. We wish him nothing but the best in his political retirement. And so the question you're asking us now is, between these two state reps, how do we know who we can trust? Everyone campaigns on gun rights at election time. Who do we know that we can trust to follow through on those promises and fight for our gun rights in the Wyoming Senate? It's an important question for us to consider. So often we do have candidates who campaign on gun rights. They're going to be a champion, and they go down to Cheyenne and they do absolutely nothing, or worse, they sabotage our gun rights. So we're going to give you guys information on this race. We're going to combine voting histories and give you guys a story that I hope you'll listen to understand kind of where these two candidates stand. In many ways, on paper, Mark Jennings and Barry Crago are very similar when it comes to gun rights, especially this year. This year, we passed Senate File 109. That was Wygo's bill to ban red flag gun seizures in Wyoming. We passed it. The governor signed it. It's law. It's done. Mark was a yes vote. Barry was a yes vote. Then we passed House Bill 125. This was Wygo's bill to get rid of deadly gun-free zones in Wyoming. Barry was a yes vote. Mark was a yes vote. The Rhinos ran harmful amendments in the House trying to weaken these bills on the floor. In both cases, in the case of Senate File 109 in particular, Barry Crago was a no vote on all four anti-gun amendments. Mark Jennings was a no vote on all four anti-gun amendments. In this case, interestingly enough, both Barry Crago and Mark Jennings have refused to answer their Wygo gun rights candidate questionnaire. So far, we're tracking pretty much 100% when it comes to gun rights. But I want to tell you guys a little story to explain to you some context on Mark Jennings. So rewind the clock 2 years ago, 2022. We are trying to pass the Second Amendment Preservation Act in Wyoming. Joe Biden is 2 years into, or just beginning his second year of his 4-year term, and he is lobbing bombs against gun owners every single day in Washington, D.C. Specifically, he's grabbing his pen and signing executive orders, bypassing the Congress, and mandating gun control by executive fiat, pistol braces, for example. So he signs an order. He tells the ATF to regulate or enforce pistol brace orders. And then he goes and tells the ATF, look, tell local law enforcement to help you do it. And so what we're dealing with in red America these days is an out-of-control ATF, an out-of-control White House that's trying to use local law enforcement to enforce federal gun control laws, or in this case, executive orders. If we don't deal with this problem, it will not matter how red or how free a red state like Wyoming is. Because if we become a mere appendage of the federal government enforcing federal gun control laws, all that we have done to safeguard gun rights in Cheyenne really doesn't count for a whole lot. So 2022 comes along. We have filing SAPA legislation in the House and Senate. It's modeled after identical legislation that our sister organization passed in Missouri. We know it's solid legislation. It's good to go. And what it says is that in this state, in Wyoming, the federal government can get bent. You're not going to use Wyoming cops to enforce federal gun control laws. If the feds want to enforce federal gun control laws in Wyoming, that's something different, but you're not going to use our cops to make it happen. And we went beyond just a flowery language. We had teeth in this bill. So if a jurisdiction violates SAPA legislation, then they could be brought into civil court for damages. And by they, I mean the agency. We're not suing cops, but if the department, if the chief of police in Cheyenne, let's just say, says, you know what, screw this, Biden says enforce an AR-15 ban, we're going to go and do it. If that happens, if they violated SAPA law, they could then be brought into civil court for damages. That is the kind of teeth that we must have to safeguard our freedoms in Wyoming. It was on track, things were moving well. And then Mark Jennings enters the situation. If you know Mark very well, you know that Mark has a very, very high opinion of himself. That's not me saying it. That's everybody in Cheyenne who knows it. So Mark drafts his own version of SEPA, uses the exact same name, and only the problem is he guts the bill. So the first thing they did was they removed the penalties. So without civil penalties, if some agency violates the law and enforces federal gun control, you have no options. And by removing the penalties, you basically have neutered the entire piece of legislation. That was number one. The next thing that Mark did was he said, you know what? We can't have, our cops enforcing federal gun control, but if the ATF wants to come into Wyoming and form a task force, as long as the ATF leads it, that's okay. They can grab some, deputies from Sheridan County, and they can grab some city cops here, and they can grab a couple troopers, and the ATF can use our manpower because it's okay then, because the federal government then is paying for their salaries on that temporary task force. Wyoming taxpayers are not footing the bill. By doing that, again, it destroys the entire idea of SEPA because a task force is how the ATF works. They come into town, they grab some cops here, some troopers there, some deputies here, and voila, they've got a 10-man unit going around enforcing federal rules, federal laws. So by taking away the prohibitor on a federal task force, he's allowing the ATF to come in here and destroy your gun rights. And then, because there's no penalties, there's nothing you can do as a gun owner to hold that jurisdiction accountable. Now, I met with Mark Jennings early in session 2022. I said, Mark, what are you doing? This bill has no teeth and it has no guts. It will not help any gun owners in Wyoming. Instead, it's going to be backed by every rhino in the state because they're going to want cover in the upcoming primaries. Guys, Mark looked right in my face and said, don't worry, we're not going to move this. I'm not really serious about it. Don't worry about it. So left that conversation kind of confused. And then the very next day, Mark begins his push for the bill. And of course, once the rhinos realized, hey, we can back this bill and have complete cover from gun owners at election time, and it still won't stop anything. It won't change anything here in Wyoming. This is great. That's exactly what happened. Every rhino in the state backed the gutted version of SEPA, and it passed, and Governor Gordon signed it. And what that means is that we have no protection in Wyoming right now from an out-of-control federal government. If by some horrible circumstance, Kamala Harris, for example, becomes president in November, she's in the White House in January, we have no protections from this maniac who is 10 times worse than President Biden ever was when it comes to gun control. And that happened because Mark Jennings knowingly and willfully made it happen. You see, Mark has almost never passed legislation here in Cheyenne. He hates that fact because the guy is not good at working with people because his arrogance gets in the way. So this was his chance to move a gun bill, even though, again, it was gutted, right? And because it was a good cover vote for all these rhinos, everyone backed it, the governor signed it, and he got his victory. But the victory was on paper only because, again, we have no protections. And that is the problem with Mark Jennings because he is in this for himself. He will do what is best for Mark. And if that means that 500,000 Wyomingites have no protection from an out-of-control White House, he's okay with that. He knowingly did all of this and sabotaged SEPA here in Wyoming in 2022. Worse than that, or I guess in addition to that, all of the conservatives who were sounding the alarm in the House and Senate in 2022, when they went to go in their own primaries in 2022, they were beaten down because they did not back this garbage legislation. So the rhinos were protected, the conservatives were attacked. You and I, we got nothing, but Mark Jennings gets his victory. You see, that's what I mean when I say that Mark is in this exclusively for himself. It's a very dangerous thing for a politician. Now, when it comes to Barry Crago, you can say a lot about Barry. He's not known for being the most conservative person in the entire building. I'll admit that. But again, the votes are the same. The actions this session are the same. And what I'll say for Barry Crago is that when the calls came in from you guys, from gun owners, when the emails came in from you guys, WIGO members, Barry listened. He listened. He voted the correct way on HB 125, the correct way on SF 109, and he opposed all of the Nicholas amendments on the bill that would weaken or gut Senate File 109. And so, whereas Mark Jennings listens to himself and he's in this for himself, Barry Crago very clearly listened to gun owners in his district. And frankly, that's what we want. We want politicians, left, right, rhino, conservative, center, whatever. We want them to listen to gun owners. If they listen to gun owners, and they do what they tell them to do, whether it's because they believe in it or they're just doing it because they feel compelled to do it, we don't care. The outcome is the same. We want to pass the policy. And that's what Barry Crago helped gun owners do this session because he listens to gun owners. So guys, that's kind of our recap in this race. It's an unusual race to be sure because again, you've got a very similar record on paper with these guys. But Mark Jennings sabotaged our gun rights in a way that we're frankly not going to fully appreciate until we have another radical commie in the White House, maybe, God forbid, as early as January. Maybe it's going to be, 4 or 5 years down the road. But when that time comes, and when that next Democrat president begins to invoke executive orders and then order Wyoming cops to enforce his or her federal gun control laws, we will have no protections here in Wyoming. And that is because of Mark Jennings. Guys, that's our report on this race. Do me a favor, share it on social media. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, our website. When you find it, be sure and share it on your own platforms. Tag your friends. Make sure everyone knows that Mark Jennings has sabotaged our gun rights to make himself feel better in Cheyenne. Guys, finally get involved in the fight today at joinwygo.com.